Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today we're going to get to know the Purple Gang, and that means Detroit, Prohibition, and organized crime. And we're going to look at the Purple Gang through the eyes of its nominal leader, one Abe Bernstein. That's right, Abe Bernstein. He's not an accountant, he's not a lawyer, he's a killer. With him, his three brothers, and all their friends from the Lower East Side of Detroit, Oakland Avenue area, they formed, well, probably the most violent gang of the Prohibition era. So if all you know about the Purple Gang is that they were the rhythm section for Elvis Presley in Jailhouse Rock, you're actually going to learn a lot today. The first thing you're going to learn is why they're called the Purple Gang. Well, some people said that that they were off color. There was just something not right about them. They were purple. There's another line of thought that says they were like bad meat at the market. They'd gone purple. Either one works. They won't be offended no matter which one you choose. They're all gone now. Now, we're going to start off, well, at the beginning of Abe's life. The first time we see his name in a newspaper, well, it's his grade 8 graduation. And he graduates from Bishop Public School in Detroit in January 24th, 1913. His first name listed, Abe Bernstein. But if you look at the graduating class of Bishop Public School, more than half of it's Jewish. You've got names Ethel Edelson, Benjamin Eder, David Friedman, Joel Friedman, Emmanuel Goldberg, Harry Horowitz, etc., etc. And that's common. That's very common in early 20th century America. As immigrants come over, they tend to go into neighborhoods where it's familiar. There are Irish neighborhoods, Lebanese neighborhoods, Polish neighborhoods. He's living in a Jewish neighborhood. Now, the first generation, the actual immigrants, when they come over in the late 19th, early 20th century, you got two choices. You become a manual laborer or you run your own small business. And most of his friends ran small businesses, and by that I mean really small. Candy stores on Oakland Avenue, newsstands, things like that. The children of the immigrants, which is Abe Bernstein would be one, had several avenues out. There's the education route, there's the entertainment route. Well, but what I mean by that is so many of the entertainers at that time were ethnically oriented. The classic combination was to have a Jewish comedian and an Italian singer, like Lewis and Martin, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, or later on with Don Rickles and Frank Sinatra. That's kind of the combination you had there. So you had Jewish people going into entertainment through vaudeville, burlesque, ultimately into movies. You could go into athletics. At the turn of the last century, boxing was dominated by Jewish, Italian, Irish, and black boxers. Believe it or not, there were lots of Jewish boxers back then. You had fellows like Kid Lewis, a multiple belt winner at different divisions. You also had Max Baer. Max Baer, Jethro's father, was Jewish and heavyweight champion of the world. But you also had the path of crime. And that was very enticing to young, poor immigrants in the early 20th century. And guess which avenue Mr. Bernstein took? Well, here's the article on November 8th, 1916. Detroit Free Press. Police seized $238 in pool room raid. It says, dashing upstairs into the pool room at 224 Randolph Street Tuesday afternoon after kidnapping the lookout on duty, a squad of patrolmen seized $238 alleged to have been wagered in a crap game. The pool room, police said, is owned by Abe Ackerman. He was not present, but Paul Cotter was. He's in charge of the room. And Abe Bernstein of 190 Brewster Street was in charge of the gaming, and they were all held on charges of gaming. So he's still in high school, but he's going down that route. You know, he's growing up in an area. It really reminds you of the Bowery Boys, the Dead End Kids. It's exactly that. They meet at Louie's sweet shop, and then God knows what happens. All kinds of adventures. The problem is with these folks, most of the adventures are of a criminal variety. Not to disappoint his mother, he does continue his education. He actually graduates from Eastern High School in January of 1917. We've got the January 24th article here. Many graduates at Eastern High. And Abe Bernstein's the third name listed. It's funny, stereotypes. Sometimes stereotypes are useful because, well, 90% of the time they're accurate. They have a list here of the officers of the graduating class, and the treasurer is one John August Levinson. And the sergeant at arms is a fellow by the name of Oscar Frederick Keidel. Sounds like a Nazi general, but he's the sergeant of arms. What else would Keidel be? He appears, Abe's back in the papers, November 5th, 1922. He's 22 years of age. It says here, 4 gamblers get 30 days each. Judge Cotter gives maximum sentence and rebuke. Maximum sentences were passed by Judge Cotter in Recorder's Court Saturday for 4 men found guilty on a charge of aiding and abetting and maintaining a gaming house. And one, of course, was Abe Bernstein, and he's sentenced to 30 days in jail. It says here that the police entered, 2 cops went in undercover and lost $12 gambling over about a 20-minute period. I wonder if it was just sour grapes. The judge had some word of cautions for our young lad. It says here, your record in the gaming business leads me to the conclusion that probation is not in place. You are fortunate not to have been in court before this. That you have it coming to you. Gambling is a menace to the public. It is a cold-blooded proposition. You take money from a working man who can't afford it, but who foolishly comes to your gambling den. If you had human hearts, you wouldn't have done this. I guess he doesn't have a human heart. Just trying to make a buck, apparently, here. What's funny about that raid, though, well, and what's funny is law, the courts are changing. They're becoming, at this point in time, they're becoming really rules-oriented. In that particular raid, it says, return money taken in raid. City officials act when court orders $1,339 be given back to the owners. They appealed. Everybody who was convicted in that raid was appealed. And it says here, this action marked the conclusion of one of the most spectacular raids conducted by police on a gambling resort here, and the termination of a vigorous prosecution that was defeated on appeals. The police and the government lost all the appeals, and the guys not only didn't go to jail, they ended up with their money back. So I don't know whether that you say crime pays, but certainly crime doesn't cost much other than your lawyer's retainer. The mob really, the Purple Gang really forms at about this time in 1923, 1924. It gels into a significant criminal organization, and they start becoming violent. The first thing you're going to see with respect to true violence is a thing called the Miraflores Massacre. It's called the Miraflores Massacre because it happens at the Miraflores apartment house. What happens here, well, like so many other, there's a territorial war between Italian, Irish, and Jewish mobs for territory relating to the bootlegging industry here. And what had happened here is that three people had been brought in from Chicago to assist the Purples in their endeavors, and those 3 individuals had exceeded their authority. They had started muscling in on people they weren't supposed to muscle in on, practicing in areas they're not supposed to practice. And so they were told to appear at an apartment that was being rented by Eddie Fletcher and Abe Axler. These are names you're going to hear throughout the story here. And they were told to show up there and we're going to straighten some stuff out. They thought they were just going to go up there and get chastised. No, they got chastised with machine guns, and they were all 3 killed by more than 100 bullets apparently were fired from the number of holes in the walls. And it was the first machine gun execution in Detroit criminal history here. The police sort of caught on that there was a Chicago aspect to this. The men had originally been brought in from Chicago. A fellow by the name of Lewis was arrested, and he was arrested in Chicago where he said to have a machine gun in his possession similar to the one used to shoot down Frank Wright, Reuben Cohen, and Joseph Bloom in the Miraflores apartment on East Alexandrian Avenue. But he nor anybody else was ever convicted of this crime. You know, murders were becoming extremely common in Detroit as they were in Chicago. But the Purple Gang, it's estimated that they were responsible for 15 to 20 murders a year throughout their run from 1924 through to the early 1930s. Here we have a Detroit Free Press article, August 26, 1927. It says here, stand mute under charge of murder. Abraham Axler, 27 years old, and Irving Milberg, both of Holbrook Avenue, stood mute on arraignment yesterday before Judge Kilpatrick, charging them with the murder of Godfrey Quayles and Hobart Harris, 30, in a Negro cabaret at 1708 St. Antoine Street. The men were held without bail, but nothing happens. I followed this murder, nothing. There's never a trial. They're charged. The charges are subsequently dropped. They're just, the police, the detectives, the prosecutors are just at such a disadvantage because rules of evidence are in play, and there is very little forensic evidence available. Their blood typing is even in its early stages. Fingerprints are there, but there's no international kind of database on. It's difficult. It's really tough to get a conviction. Here we have another article a month later in the Detroit Free Press, October 29th, 1927. It's regarding a completely different crime. 2 with guns held on murder charge. Abraham Axler, who we met before, who said he has no home, and Edward Fletcher, who we're going to see later, gave his address as Holbrook Avenue, were standing on a street corner when detectives William McMillan and Herbert Hale passed by yesterday afternoon. Axler, the detective says, pulled out a gun from his pocket and threw it under an auto when he saw him. Fletcher was found to be armed. Both were arrested and held on a technical charge of murder. But it doesn't say with respect to whose murder that was. And they were never formally charged. What you see here a lot is when a murder occurs, when any serious crimes occur, they just round up the usual suspects. They'll round up 10, 20, 50, 100 potential assailants, and they'll charge multiple people with heinous crimes only to drop them later. And what's funding all of this? Why is there all this action in Detroit in the 20s? Well, it has to do with Prohibition, of course. Prohibition came in the United States in 1920, but Michigan had been dry since 1917. If you go back to our episode on Prohibition, you'll see that during the war, Prohibition was brought in as a temporary measure throughout many of the states, and Michigan was one of those states. What makes Detroit unique is the Detroit River. Detroit River is 28 miles long, going from Lake St. Clair down to Lake Erie. It's as narrow as a half a mile and as wide as 2.5 miles. It's actually wider than the Mississippi. But at any point, you can get from one side to the other in about 5 minutes in a speedboat. And what's ultra tempting for people in Detroit is the fact that right across the river in Walkerville, Ontario, is one of the largest distilleries in the world, the Hiram Walker Distillery, home of Canadian Club. And to tempt them even more is that there's a giant neon sign 80 feet high that says Canadian Club, Walkerville, Ontario, advertising it, pointing out only the only people who can see this are people in the States. And so you've got a giant distillery sitting there on the border between the two nations. And did you know at least half the illegal liquor that comes into the United States from 1920 to 1933 comes through the Windsor, Ontario, Detroit, Michigan border, comes right through here. There's so much money to be made. The Purple Gang, who's controlling the bootlegging in the mid and late 1920s, they're the supplier. They're the primary supplier of Chicago. It goes right through there, also down to St. Louis. They're providing the booze for the entirety of the Midwest. The trade is so big, and we're going to see this later down, that there's actually a gang, a portion of the Purple Gang known as the Little Navy or the Jewish Navy that operates entirely on the Detroit River. They operate with speedboats, with trucks, and you're hopefully seeing some of the photographs right now. They day and night, winter or summer, and while they are losing as many as 25 speedboats a year, that's nothing. It's peanuts. They're not getting 5% of the booze confiscated that's coming through. So it's an incredibly lucrative proposition. And when there's that much money floating around, just like the drug industry today, the organized criminals are going to take advantage of that. Now, there's a perceived crime wave in Detroit, and the newspapers are just reflecting public opinion. It says here, roundup of Detroit gangsters ordered by prosecutor. Underworld leaders flee from dragnet. Well, what's happening? It says here, acting upon the orders of the prosecutor's office, police yesterday were instructed to arrest on site known gangsters and hijackers in Detroit in connection with the murder of patrolman Vivian Welch, who was mysteriously shot to death last Tuesday noon. So an officer, Vivian is a man, not a woman. So Vivian's been shot. It says here, this unprecedented move on the part of the police department is believed to have sent dozens of underworld leaders to cover, with several of them seeking or having moved to other cities. One prominent gangster was in police toils last night, and they love using the word toils instead of custody. According to Inspector Henry Garvin, and you're going to see Garvin's name throughout this for all the years, of the Criminal Investigative Squad, he is Abe Bernstein, for several years a prominent habitus of underworld haunts, Garvin said. I wonder if he actually used the word habitus. I've never heard the word habitus used in polite conversation, but that's what he said. He's habituating there. It says the order to arrest gangsters on site yesterday followed the release of the last 9 of more than 49 suspects who were captured by police in connection with the Welsh killing. They just round up the usual suspects by the dozen. It says here that Welsh's bullet-ridden body was found at St. Albans Avenue and Faber Street. 9 bullets had penetrated his body. And it's noted that with respect to Bernstein, that Bernstein is the organizer and leader of the Purple Gang. Garvin said he referred to an organization said by police to have been organized to provide protection for underworld characters in their illegitimate activities. Protection just means protecting from them. Like you pay the Purple Gang not to hurt you real bad. Vivian Welch's murder would never be solved. And as we saw there in the Miller Flores massacre, the fact that these people were gunned down with machine guns in an apartment rented by Purple Gang hoodlums, they couldn't get a conviction on those facts. Now, this one has a similar thing. It says the brother of the man held, Raymond Bernstein, so he's Abe's brother, admitted ownership of the car in which Welch was slain last Tuesday. Bernstein told police that the car was stolen from him on Monday by hijackers who also took 12 cases of whiskey. So he admits to being a bootlegger, but says that his car was mysteriously stolen on the evening before this murder. So even though they've got 3 guys being killed in an apartment owned by the Purples, they got the fellow being slaughtered in a car owned by one of the Purples, and nobody can get a conviction. Well, the crime wave continues. February 6, 1928, rid Detroit of gunmen, police told. Detectives given orders by Fox to war on underworld. Welch murder brings reprisals. We are going to make Detroit a tough spot for gunmen and gangsters. We are going to drive every one of them out of the city. Classic. It's a classic case of over-promising and underperforming. And there's no way to lose credibility with the public faster than over-promising and underperforming. They've been promising to break the crime wave for years. They haven't got a single conviction of anything. Well, why was Welch killed here? It says here that Patrolman Welch was killed in Hamtramck. Officials say that the killing was the result of a bootlegging shakedown by Welch and others. They believe the Purple Gang, an underworld organization devoted to protection for criminals, was responsible for the murder. So he's trying to shake down the shakedowners. He's trying to get extra money off of the Purple Gang for services that he thinks he's rendered. That had no chance of turning out well, and of course it didn't. It says here, Abe Bernstein, said by Garvin to be a well-known gangster, was arrested Saturday. He is held on suspicion of murder. Garvin declares that Bernstein is the organizer and leader of the Purple Gang and believes that he knows something about the Welch killing. So on February 6th, says we've got him. He knows something of the Welch killing. On February 7th, says here in the Free Press, police killer search fails. Nearly 50 arrested, but slaying of Welch remains puzzle. Bernstein released. So they're condemning him on the one day. 1 day later, they're releasing. It says reputed gang leader freed. Abe, and has a picture here of Abe Bernstein. Abe Bernstein here actually looks like not an accountant, an actuary. An actuary is an accountant on steroids. He certainly does not look like a classic killer. But here's the problem. It's that article summarizes the fundamental problem getting convictions in the 1920s. It says, in a murder case of this kind, we must have either witnesses to the killing or else a confession of the crime, and we have neither. Any evidence we may have thus far is certainly not admissible in court. And that's the problem. There's no forensics. You got to have an eyewitness, and if you got an eyewitness to a mob murder, well, heck, that's the whole plot of Some Like It Hot. You got to go down to Florida and hide out from the mob. The next thing the Purple Gang gets involved in is something that might make you chuckle, in that it's known as the Cleaners and Dyers War. Cleaning. Dry cleaning. But what you have to realize is that back in the 1920s, every man wore a wool suit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they had to be dry cleaned. And the cleaning industry was 10 times what the cleaning industry is now. And it was one of the first industries to be unionized, and that's how the Purples get involved. They've been hiring themselves out as muscle. They'll rough people up, they'll break bones, they'll kill them if you have to, and they get hired by the union. And this is one of the first times that unions and organized crime are going to work together. You're going to see it down the road with the dock workers in New York. You're going to see it with the Teamsters and their pension fund. That's how Jimmy Hoffa ends up getting buried. There's the unions and the mob become tight, but this is one of the first applications of that. They're hired by the union to keep the union members in line and to harass non-union shops. But the Purples, being an organized crime syndicate, do what organized crime syndicates do, and they use this as an opportunity to shake down everybody. They start demanding between $1,000 and $5,000 a week. That's between $30,000 and $150,000 a week of all the major dry cleaning operations in Southeast Michigan. They're demanding that for protection. One of the dry cleaning shop owners actually complains to the police and gets the district attorney to file charges of conspiracy to extort against ultimately 9 Purple members. Headline, Detroit Free Press, April 3rd, 1928. Purple chief due to give up. 6 other alleged members of gang will surrender. Attorney promises. And so they're all charged. They're charged with conspiracy. It's noted here that 2 named as Purple accusers deny charges. Actually, some of the guys that were actually accusing the Purple of the Purples of extortion ended up getting charged as well because they were participating in the conspiracy. It all came to nothing, though. Oh, in any event, the Detective Garvin does a nice summary in this article of the history of the Purples. It said that the Purple Gang was formed 10 years ago, and that both Bernsteins were among the original members. The gang began its career on Hastings Street, according to Garvin, faded to obscurity and came back to life again 18 months ago as a full-fledged criminal force headed by Abe Bernstein. All of its members, it's noted, have police records. Well, of course they do. They're organized criminals. Trial's about to begin. It's noted in the Free Press of April 20th, 1928, that 8 are held on accusation of extortion. Abe Bernstein jailed 10 days for contempt. I wasn't able to find out exactly what he did. And $5,000 a week paid for truck guards. Wholesaler testifies in court. The Purples are charging you $5,000 to provide guards on your trucks, but that only protect you from the Purples. So what happens after like a 3-week trial and dozens of witnesses? Well, what happens is that 8 Purples are freed. It says here in the Detroit Free Press, it's September 14th, 1928. It says here, it says 8 Purples freed, suit threatened. The lawyers for the Purples actually threatened to sue the business owner that brought the charges. That never did happen because the Purples don't work things out in court. They tend to use machine guns and pistols. And it's noted that after deliberating a little more than an hour, the jury trying the remaining 8 alleged members of the Purple Gang in the court of Judge Carlisle Bowles returned a verdict of not guilty at 1:50 yesterday afternoon. The acquitted men with 2 others who were previously freed by directed verdict were all charged with conspiracy to extort. So it came to nothing, no conviction. Another crime, though, where there was no conviction registered shows the reach of the Purples. The Purples, as I had mentioned earlier, were providing the entire Midwest with their booze. They worked closely with Al Capone, really did. They worked close with Al Capone and provided all of his joints on the south side of Chicago with Canadian whiskey. They also, though, were trying to get in on the north side and deal with Bugs Moran. And on February 13th, 1929, Abe Bernstein called up Mr. Moran and said that he had a new truck full of Canadian whiskey and asked him if he wanted it. Said they could deliver it the next day. Bugs Moran said, sure, I'll bring it to our warehouse in 2200 block of North Clark Street, and we'll be ready for you at 10:30. Well, at 10:30, the truck didn't show up, but a couple of police cars showed up with a few guys dressed as police officers carrying machine guns and ordered the 7 fellows in the garage up against the wall, and they gunned them down. And that, of course, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So the St. Valentine's Massacre started with a call from Abe Bernstein to Bugs Moran that no doubt Al Capone knew all about and was used to set up the massacre. Public went nuts, though, after that in Chicago, and organized crime began figuring that they had a real problem. They had a PR problem. They had a PR problem in the fact that a lot of their men were getting plugged. So they did what every organization does. They organized a convention. Where would you do a convention in 1929? Well, you go to Atlantic City. So 1 month after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, all the heads of the families and the heads of the organizations are meeting in Atlantic City. And they meet for 3 days. It was a regular, some like it hot festival down there at the resort. So who was there? Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Al Capone, Meyer Lansky, Dutch Schultz, Bugsy Siegel, Nucky Johnson, the Steve Buscemi character from TV was there representing the Atlantic City mob, and Abe Bernstein was there representing Detroit. And they met for 3 days, carved out territories, tried to work out agreements, tried to bring this thing under control. Did it work? A little. They would have to have many more of these conferences, and some of them became quite famous out in the Adirondacks and in the woods. But that was the first time organized crime went national. In that conference in Atlantic City. Crime's so bad, though, that Detroit asked to bring in the feds. They bring the feds and maybe they can help. And so Detroit Free Press article, May 17th, 1929, says here, bondsmen fail Purple Gang, refuse to furnish $100,000 and $50,000 bail that's asked. Suspects are then jailed. What happened? Half the guys in the Purples were charged, were given a $100,000 bail, the other $50,000, and it's on charges you're going to see again and again. It's a combination. Violations of the Volstead Act, the Prohibition law, and violation of the Income Tax Act, because you're not paying income tax on the money that you're making on the illegal activity. So they charge everybody and make a big deal out of it, but it just goes away. There's no convictions, and Abe does not spend any time in jail with respect to that particular crime. But people continue to get killed, and we've got an article here in the Detroit Free Press, August 1, 1929. It says, police to quiz Purple Chief. Gang leader will be asked to explain alleged quarrel with Shapiro. It says, Abe Bernstein, reputed leader of the notorious Purple Gang, will be questioned by police today in connection with the murder of Irving Shapiro, muscle man of the gang, who was taken for a ride on Saturday morning. And they're using the term taken for a ride just the way you would think they would use it. The man was taken for a ride and whacked. Where does that come from? Well, I found out that for the first use of the term taken for a ride in reference to a hit occurs in the 1928 film Lights of New York. And within a year, it's part of the national lexicon. It's been used in articles here describing the demise of Mr. Shapiro. It says here the gang leader will be asked to explain an alleged quarrel between him and Shapiro relating to the latter's habit of making independent raids, particularly on individuals who enjoyed the friendship of the gang. You can't shake down somebody who's paying you protection, and that's what he wants. That's what he's been doing. They don't like it, and Mr. Shapiro gets whacked. It says the bullet-riddled body of Shapiro was thrown from a speeding car in front of 2464 Taylor Avenue at 3 p.m. Saturday. You know, it's just like in the movies. You know when you watch those movies with Jimmy Cagney and George Raft in the 1930s. You think it's all embellished. It's not. This is exactly what's going on in the streets of major cities in America. They got to do something about it. They got to try to do anything about it. So they bring in a new law. It's a stupid law, but they bring in a law. It's called the Public Enemy Law. It says 3 alleged purples to go to trial Saturday. It says Michigan's new weapon to rid the state of hoodlums. The Public Enemy Law was tried for the first time Thursday. Charged under the act as disorderly persons, Abe Axler, Eddie Fletcher, and Charles Auerbach were arraigned before the judge. Fletcher and Axler, who were arrested last week at Auerbach's home during the hunt for the Collingwood Avenue massacre killers, and we're going to deal with that in a second, are named in the warrants as members of the Purple Gang. All 3 men pleaded not guilty. It's just a harassment thing. If you are found to be a person who's with no legal means of support and is a known criminal, you can be found guilty of this act and be convicted. It carries a maximum penalty of 90 days in jail and a $100 fine. It says the law will be used extensively in Detroit against underworld characters. With it, we hope to drive the gangsters out of town. And that they note a cautionary thing. If the higher courts are going to hold that the law is illegal, now is the time to find out. Well, they found out because we got the Michigan Law Review here. And it says here the defendants were convicted of the crime of being disorderly persons within the meaning of Section 167 of the Michigan Public Act. It says held Section 167 of the statute is unconstitutional and void as denying the defendant due process of law. Well, that's pretty obvious. You're being convicted just because you're a known bad guy. So once you're a bad guy, you could continuously on a treadmill get convicted of crimes you haven't even committed other than being a bad guy. Yeah, well, that didn't fly. But they did mention the Collingwood Massacre. The Collingwood Massacre is it's the first chink in the armor of the Purple Gang. It's where things start going downhill. It's very similar to the Milleflores Massacre in that there's an intergang dispute. 3 of the purple, these are 3 purples that are basically, they're running the little navy, the Jewish Navy. Again, they start operating outside their ambit. They start doing things they're not supposed to do. They're called into a meeting, and this time it's to apartment. They call in, the 3 fellows are named Herman, Paul, Isidore Sutker, and Joseph Libowitz are called into a meeting where they think, again, they're just going to be chastised for what they've done and maybe work out a deal, but they're not. As soon as they get into the apartment, which is rented by Fletcher, another purple torpedo, they're gunned down. And the reality of this time, there's a witness, and we're going to learn about that in just a second. And that witness is going to, to a large extent, end up bringing down the purples. Here we go. The Detroit Free Press, October 29, 1931. Gunmen are hunted at massacre trial. 3 suspects appear in gay attire. And why that's important? Well, it's not that important, but it's amusing. It says here, amid an atmosphere of guns, guards, and gambling, 3 men went on trial before Judge Donald Zeal in Recorder's Court Wednesday, charged with the massacre in the Collingwood Manor apartments, September 18th. 3 leaders they massacred 3 leaders of the Little Navy Gang, and then they mentioned who they are. It says here, the 3 defendants, Irving Milberg, Harry Keywell, and Raymond Bernstein, who's Abe's brother, sat without batting an eye in court Wednesday while 500 spectators were lined up and searched for weapons. Well, why are they searching for weapons? It says here, extra details of police paced the halls and guarded the doorways to prevent any attempt on the life of Saul Levine, state witness. Saul Levine. Who's Saul Levine? We'll find out in a second. But for the first time, remember, you need to have, in order to get a conviction at this time, you need a witness. And we've got someone crazy enough who's going to testify against the purples. Then they get into the sartorial aspects. It says the defendant trio were by far the most expensively and colorfully garbed persons in the room. It says Keywell wore a vivid blue-green suit, custom tailored linen. Bernstein sported a brown check suit, brown shirt of softer hue, brown and white hose with brown clocks. Clocks on hose, on your socks are the decorative element that run down the side of the sock and into your foot. It kind of looks like hands of a clock. And then it notes that Milberg chose light green as his motif. His suit was of solid field gray with tie and hose striking sharper notes. So they're giving a review of the sartorial splendor that was the defendants in this trial. But unlike the other trials, there's going to be a conviction here. And why? Because for some reason they allowed Saul Levine to live. Saul Levine actually worked for the Purples, and he drove the three victims to the apartment. He witnessed the execution, and he saw the executioners leave, and he gave that evidence at trial. It says here in the Detroit Free Press, January 26, 1969, in a recap of bygone times, that there was a witness, however, a bootlegger and bookmaker named Saul Levine. While 8 armed men guarded him in the witness box, he delivered testimony that led to life prison terms for Harry Caywell, Irving Milberg, and Ray Bernstein. Then Levine disappeared for 30 years. That's right, 30 years. He spent most of that time hiding out in Belgium, reportedly. And I guess that's just what you have to do when you turn state's evidence on the mob. Now, Abe Bernstein didn't want to leave his brother and his cronies languishing in prison, so he actually organized an appeal. It says here in the Free Press, July 18, 1933, Purples make plea for new murder trial. 3 convicted for massacre present fresh alibis. 30 affidavits bolster attorney. The appeal was rejected. 30 affidavits full of lies didn't carry much weight, but at least Abe could say he gave it his best. Things are getting hot in Detroit, and so Abe took it to the road, and he went out west for a little vacation. It says here in the Detroit Free Press, September 9th, 1933, Detroit gangster held in roundup. Drive in Los Angeles jails Bernstein. Well, it turns out Los Angeles was having the same kind of problems Detroit was, and they brought in the same kind of stupid, unconstitutional law. But here's what he's got. Abe Bernstein, former Detroit gang leader, is one of the hoodlums rounded up Friday when Los Angeles launched an unprecedented step to drive men with criminal records out of the city. He, together with his bodyguard and chauffeur, Jack Budd, were named in a unique indictment drawn up by the county grand jury and charged with conspiracy to become vagrants. So they're conspiring to get by with no obvious means of support. I thought that was just being a rich guy, but apparently here that implies that you're a criminal. It says Los Angeles authorities, alarmed at the increasing number of hoodlums gathered there, aimed the drive with the purpose of ridding the district of all undesirables. Bernstein and Budd were picked up and placed under $50,000 bail. That's more than $1 million bail for being vagrants. Okay. The specific charge against Bernstein is association with a known thief, Budd, his chauffeur, because he'd had theft convictions back in Michigan. The charge is considered conspiracy to commit vagrancy and is punishable by a term for 1 to 5 years in prison. So it's much more serious than the Michigan law, but no less constitutional. It goes, the indictments are designed so that the accused may escape trial by leaving the city. All they want you to do is leave. But you can't do that, and nothing comes of this. It's ruled unconstitutional as well. The final nail in the coffin, literally, to the organized Purple Gang occurs in November 1933 when, headlining the Detroit Free Press, Abe Axler is murdered with Ed Fletcher in Ottawa on Lonely Country Road. Hoodlum's body riddled by shots. Dope peddling mob is blamed by police for dual killing. 2 public enemies had just returned to the city, and there's a lovely picture of the widow, Mrs. Axler, in her mink coat, crying at the death of her husband. It says here in the Free Press, November 27, 1933, guns of rival gangsters end crime careers of Abe Axler and Eddie Fletcher. They're gunned down. Blame placed on dope ring. They're gunned down because times are changing. It's the end of 1933. Prohibition is going out. The mob's going to lose all their money they were making on bringing in illegal booze. So now they're going to look at maybe we can make some money with illegal drugs. The problem is that ran them headlong into Joe Zerilli and the Detroit Mafia, the first incarnation of the mafia in Detroit. And they're behind the killings of Axler and Fletcher. And that's sort of between the Collingwood case, where 6 members, 3 from the Little Navy and 3 of their own, plus the 2 main torpedoes here are gone, and there really isn't much left of the Purple Gang, and they sort of turn over the running of the city to the Italian Mafia. What's left for them to do? Well, there's still good old-fashioned crime, and we have here the Detroit Free Press, June 4th, 1936. Oh, a wild article. Police capture wheeled fort. May solve series of safe robberies. Somebody had been breaking into businesses and stealing the safes. Not cracking the safes, but stealing the whole 1,000-pound safe. And then you take it off site, blow off the doors and stuff at your leisure, and take the contents. So what happened here? It says state police said Wednesday that they believed they had solved at least 50 central Michigan robberies with the arrest of 2 alleged former members of Detroit's Purple Gang and seizure of an armored automobile and weapons. What, they got a tank? Let's see what happened. The 2 men arrested in early morning raids on their apartments were Louis Fleischer, 31 years old, brother of Harry Fleischer, and Sam Bernstein, also known as Sam Stone, who's the brother of Abe Bernstein. It says here, the raiding squad took the group into custody after detectives found the armored sedan in a curtained garage near Fleischer's junkyard. It contained equipment the officer said was designed to handle heavy safes and load them into the car for a fast getaway, and the car was capable of traveling at 100 miles an hour. They also found there were a large number of pistols, shot-off shotguns, and rifles with dynamite caps, nitroglycerin, and tools that they would use to blow the door off the safe later. It says here that the automobile stolen from a Ferndale dealership last fall had been rebuilt into a rolling fortress. Sheet metal protected the body and bulletproof glass had replaced the regular windshield and windows. The rear window was removable so that a steel plate could be inserted and flaps of steel protected the rear tires. 2 hinged sets of license plates were on the car. It's a rolling armored vehicle designed explicitly to rob safes. Well, that's not what Abe's involved in. Abe for the rest of his life is going to be involved. If he's involved in criminal activity at all, he's going to be involved in bookmaking and gambling. These are nice, soft, safe activities where he doesn't have to get involved too much in killing of rivals here. A great one, a great article here is in the Detroit Free Press, August 11th, 1940. It says 29 still saw it as Reading gives self up. Who's Reading? Reading is the next mayor of Detroit. What the heck did he do? It also says that alleged members of Old Purple Gang are included. It says following the surrender to police of Richard Reading on the county grand jury handbook conspiracy indictment, it's being charged with bookmaking, running a gambling operation. Circuit Court Homer Ferguson announced Saturday that a total of 29 persons headed by Abe and Joe Bernstein, so Abe's been charged with this again. Alleged former members of the Purple Gang are still being sought under the warrant. So there's a gambling and an income tax component to this, but the width of this is just wild. It says here, the warrant charges 156 defendants, including former Mayor Reading, prosecutor Duncan McCrae, and 78 policemen, with conspiracy to obstruct justice by allowing the multi-million-dollar bookmaking racket to operate in Wayne County. Eventually, Abe Bernstein would plead guilty and be fined $1,000, which is probably what he's making on a typical day. Now, we remember that when there was downtime, that Bernstein would head off to Los Angeles. He also goes down to Miami to see Meyer Lansky. But this is a fun article on December 11th, 1945. It says, Guy Nunn, WJR newscaster, has a swell piece in this week's Collier's. Abe Bernstein takes some of the credit for George Raft's start in pictures. A good friend of Wallace Beery, Bernstein persuaded him to give Raft a break in a picture many years ago. Beery agreed and Raft was on the way. But does he really know of these Hollywood stars? Well, here's another article, September 11th, 1946. Wallace Beery, in town to pick up a new car, had dinner with his old buddy Abe Bernstein. Was still chuckling over how he put an interviewing reporter to work winding copper lines on a reel. Wally will start for Wyoming soon, and a few weeks of hunting and fishing before starting a new picture. So he's a buddy. He's a buddy of the big star Wallace Beery. He's also involved in gambling, as I said. That's where he continues to make his money. March 1st, 1948, it says Abe Bernstein, in the Free Press, was said by Hale to have been a silent partner in the Old Purple Gang. Presently, Hale said he's involved in a bookmaking and gambling operation. Known hangouts of gangsters, mainly bars, were quiet over the weekend. So he's still involved, but where is he doing it from? Well, okay, in the Free Press, March 2nd, 1948, it says, the Free Press was absolutely correct in saying that only little fish were being caught in the police net, and that major underworld figures were still free. Of the 89 persons arrested, only one was considered important. And of course, that was Abe Bernstein, former leader of the Purple Gang in Detroit and now operator of the Abern Trading Company of New York, a New York brokerage firm. They want you to believe that he's got a legit brokerage business here. I highly doubt that. But he was arrested at the Hotel Book Cadillac, where he has a suite. And he's going to live in the Hotel Book Cadillac, the best hotel in Detroit, for 30 years up until his death. It says here that a .45 caliber automatic pistol was found in Bernstein's room, but that the police were not notified. I'm going to find out why, he said. Unsurprisingly, and basically yawning, the Detroit Free Press has the following article in May 3rd, 1951. Bookie at Book Cadillac? Horrors. Investment broker shocked. It says here, Frank X. Martel, Wayne County Chief Executive, accused Abe Bernstein, former Purple Gang leader, of making book at the Book Cadillac. It says here, once a kingpin of rum running and other activities of the Purples, Bernstein told the Free Press from his suite at the Book, "I never talk ill of anyone, and I don't like to have anyone accuse me of falsehoods." So he's in the Book Cadillac. He's at his suite, and he is, in fact, the best we can see here is that he is running a gambling operation out of a beautiful suite at the best hotel in town, and that's his version of retirement. He actually dies in that suite on March 7th, 1968, at the Book Cadillac Hotel. And in the end, that brings to a conclusion the whole story of the Purples. In the end, most of them were killed. Some were sentenced to long terms in prison, and only a few, like Abe Bernstein, died in their beds. A peaceful ending to a mostly unpeaceful life. And that brings us to our themed cocktail. And what could be better than a bootlegger making himself an old-fashioned? What kind of old-fashioned? Well, how about a Canadian Club old-fashioned in honor of the Canadian Club distillery across the river from Detroit? We go with 2 ounces of Canadian Club, a teaspoon of sugar, 4 dashes of Angostura bitters, and a teaspoon of water. This is where my way I would build this will differ from others. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use 2 rock glasses. In the one rock glass, you're just going to put a giant ice cube, size of a woman's fist, stick that in there by itself. In the other one, the other rock glass, you're going to use the 2 ounces of Canadian Club, the teaspoon of sugar, the 4 dashes of Angostura bitters, and the teaspoon of water, and you're going to dissolve the sugar. When the sugar is completely dissolved, pour that over the ice cube into the other glass. Then take a long mixing spoon and stir that 30 times around. That will allow proper dilution. Will also bring the temperature down to near freezing. Then we're going to garnish this with an orange peel. But before you before you throw the orange peel in, you must twist it to get those acids out over top of the drink. Then toss your orange peel into the drink, and you've got a wonderful Canadian Club Old Fashioned. Look back across the river to Detroit and give a salute to Abe Bernstein, a leader of a violent but ultimately legendary criminal organization. So remember, like and subscribe. Subscriptions are especially important to the development of the channel. And we'll see you next week with another interesting tale from the past. Take care, everybody.